I'm Stella, 29 female. I live in a city that's always moving, a place where the background hum of traffic and life is a constant companion. My apartment, a small but meticulously organized space, is my sanctuary from the chaos. By day, I'm a data analyst, a job that suits my personality perfectly. I find comfort in numbers, in patterns, in the logical and predictable nature of things. My life was, for the most part, as orderly as the spreadsheets I managed. But a single, screeching moment of violence and twisted metal shattered that order. And in the deafening silence that followed, I learned that the deepest wounds aren't always the ones that bleed. This is the story of how the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor became my storm, and how I finally learned to put a price on my pain. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The rain was relentless that Tuesday evening, turning the city streets into a slick, reflective canvas of blurred neon lights. I was driving home from a late shift, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. My mind was on the project I'd just completed, a complex analysis that had consumed my week. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, a cup of tea, and the familiar comfort of my own space. One moment, I was humming along to a song on the radio, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. The next, there was a blinding flash of headlights in my rearview mirror, a horrifying screech of tires that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the night, and then an impact that felt like the world being ripped apart. My car was thrown forward, spinning violently before slamming into the concrete median. The sound was deafening, a symphony of shattering glass, groaning metal, and the sickening thud of my head hitting the side window. When everything stopped, there was a moment of absolute, ringing silence. It was a heavy, oppressive quiet, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the hazard lights I hadn't turned on and the steady drumming of rain on the mangled roof. I tasted blood, a coppery tang that mixed with the metallic scent of deployed airbags. A sharp, searing pain shot through my left shoulder and down my arm, and a dull, throbbing ache began to bloom in my head. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. I tried to move, but my body felt disconnected, a marionette with tangled strings. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Through the shattered windshield, the world outside was a distorted watercolor painting of red and blue flashing lights. The wail of sirens grew closer, a sound that should have been comforting, but only amplified the terror that was gripping me. Strangers' faces appeared at my window, their mouths moving, but their words were muffled, lost in the fog that was descending over my mind. I remember a firefighter carefully prying open my door, the click of the jaws of life, and a paramedic's calm voice telling me to stay still. The next few hours were a blur of sterile white rooms, beeping machines, and the low, urgent murmur of medical professionals. I was diagnosed with a severe concussion, a dislocated shoulder, and 3 fractured ribs. The doctor who treated me in the ER was kind but clinical, his words a detached litany of my injuries. "You're very lucky," he said, his eyes scanning my chart. "It could have been much, much worse." Lucky. The word echoed in the throbbing space behind my eyes. I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken, terrified, and utterly, profoundly alone. My first call, once they'd stabilized me and moved me to a room, was to my mother, Eleanor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I expected to hear panic, concern, a rush of maternal instinct pouring through the receiver. Instead, what I got was a sigh. "Oh, Stella," she said, her voice laced with an exasperation that was as familiar as it was painful. "Are you sure you're not exaggerating? You've always been a bit dramatic." I was stunned into silence. I tried to explain the severity of it, the spinning car, the shattered glass, the doctor's words. Her response was to cut me off. "Well, the important thing is that you're alive. Cars can be replaced. You just need to be more careful." There was no "I'm on my way." No "Are you okay?" Just a thinly veiled accusation and a rush to end the conversation. She had a book club meeting in the morning, she said, and needed her rest. My next call was to my brother, Ethan. He was 2 years younger, a charismatic real estate agent who moved through life with an easy, unearned confidence. Surely he would understand. His reaction was, if anything, worse. "Whoa, that's crazy," he said, his voice distant, distracted. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "So, is the car a total write-off? Because you know that'll tank your insurance." He asked about the other driver, whether I'd gotten their details, whether I was going to sue. It was a business transaction, a problem to be assessed for its financial implications. My pain, my fear, my shock, they weren't even data points in his calculation. He ended the call by saying he was in the middle of a deal and would check in later. He never did. Lying in that stiff hospital bed, the antiseptic smell of the room filling my lungs, a cold, heavy realization began to dawn on me. It was a feeling more painful than the fractured ribs or the dislocated shoulder. It was the chilling understanding that the people I had been conditioned to believe were my anchor were, in fact, an ocean away. They heard the words car accident, but they didn't see the wreckage. They couldn't feel the terror. They simply saw an inconvenience, a disruption to their own neatly ordered lives. The sirens had faded, but the silence they left behind in my family was the most deafening sound of all. It was in that silence that I first understood I was truly on my own. My physical injuries would heal, but the wound of their indifference felt deeper, more permanent, and infinitely more isolating. It was the first crack in a foundation I had mistakenly believed was solid. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the entire structure was about to come crashing down. The hospital discharged me 2 days later with a sling for my arm, a prescription for painkillers that barely touched the edges of the pain, and a leaflet on concussion recovery. My best friend, Chloe, was the one who came to pick me up. She didn't offer platitudes or dismissive advice. She just hugged me gently, her embrace a stark contrast to the emotional void left by my family. She had packed a bag for me with soft pajamas, my favorite snacks, and a new book, small gestures that screamed a level of care and attention I was desperately craving. As she drove me back to my apartment, I stared out the window, the familiar city streets now feeling alien and threatening. Every car that got too close sent a jolt of panic through me. "Have you heard from your mom or Ethan?" Chloe asked, her voice soft, careful. I shook my head, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through my skull. "Mom texted this morning. Hope you're feeling better." That was it. "Ethan hasn't contacted me at all." Chloe's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She knew my family's dynamics better than anyone. She witnessed their casual dismissiveness for years, the subtle ways they minimized my achievements and amplified my flaws. "I'm so sorry, Stell," she said, and the genuine empathy in her voice made the tears I'd been holding back finally spill over. The first week at home was a living nightmare. The concussion made it impossible to look at screens, so my work as a data analyst was out of the question. Reading was difficult, the words swimming on the page. The nights were the worst. I was plagued by flashbacks, the sound of screeching tires and shattering glass replaying in my mind on a loop. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the phantom pain of the impact radiating through my body. The physical pain was a constant, grinding presence, but it was the psychological toll that was truly devastating. I felt fragile, exposed, and terrified of everything. The world outside my apartment door felt like a minefield. My mother called once during that first week. The conversation was brief and infuriating. "You really need to try to get back to normal, Stella," she advised, her tone crisp and matter-of-fact. "The longer you wallow, the harder it will be. It's all about mindset. Just think positive thoughts." "Mom, I have a concussion," I tried to explain, my voice trembling with a mixture of pain and frustration. "I can't just think positive thoughts and make it go away. My brain is injured." "Don't be so dramatic," she countered, a familiar refrain. "When your brother fell out of that tree when he was 10, he broke his arm in 2 places, and he was back at school the next day. Sometimes you just have to be strong and push through." The comparison was so absurd, so invalidating, that it left me speechless. She was comparing a straightforward childhood injury to a traumatic event that had left me with a brain injury and post-traumatic stress. In her world, All pain was the same, and the solution was always to ignore it. The conversation ended with her telling me she and my father were thinking of going on a cruise and asking if I could water their plants while they were away. Ethan finally surfaced 5 days after the accident. He didn't call, he sent a text. "Hey, heard you're out of the hospital. You need to call the insurance company ASAP. Don't let them lowball you on the car's value." It was followed by another text a minute later. "And make sure you get a doctor's note for work. You'll need the paper trail." There it was again, the complete and utter absence of human compassion. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't ask if I needed anything. His only concern was the logistical, financial aftermath. My well-being was a non-issue. I was just a project to be managed, a series of tasks to be checked off a list. I typed and deleted a dozen angry responses before settling on a simple, "Thanks for the advice." The effort of typing even that short message left me exhausted and shaking. In the weeks that followed, the physical injuries began to heal. My ribs stopped screaming with every breath, and the sling came off my arm, but the invisible wounds only seemed to get deeper. The flashbacks continued. I developed a debilitating fear of driving. Just sitting in a car was enough to trigger a full-blown panic attack. My sleep was still ravaged by nightmares. My focus was shot, and the thought of returning to a job that required intense concentration felt impossible. The vibrant, orderly world I had once inhabited had been replaced by a gray, anxious fog. Throughout it all, my family's support remained a barren wasteland. Their version of help was offering unsolicited, useless advice. "You should try yoga," my mother suggested. "It's very calming." "You just need to get back on the horse," Ethan said when I told him about my fear of driving. "Force yourself to do it." They spoke of my trauma as if it were a stubborn stain that could be removed with enough willpower and the right cleaning product. They refused to acknowledge its depth, its complexity, its very real presence in my life. Their cold comfort was more damaging than no comfort at all. It was a constant, insidious invalidation of my reality. It made me question myself, wonder if I was, as my mother so often suggested, just being dramatic. Was I weak for not being able to just get over it? It was a lonely, terrifying place to be, trapped in my own head with the echoes of a trauma that no one in my family was willing to see. Their neglect wasn't passive. It was an active, crushing force, and it was pushing me closer and closer to a breaking point. I was drowning, and the people who were supposed to be my lifeguards were standing on the shore, telling me to try swimming harder. The breaking point came about a month after the accident. I was attempting to make a simple trip to the grocery store with Chloe. I'd managed to get into the passenger seat of her car, my hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, my breathing shallow. We were halfway there when a car behind us honked its horn, a loud, impatient blast. The sound ripped through me. Suddenly, I wasn't in Chloe's car anymore. I was back in my own, the headlights blinding me, the sound of the horn a prelude to the crash. My heart seized in my chest, the world tilted, and I couldn't breathe. I was having a full-blown panic attack, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face, completely overwhelmed by a terror I couldn't control. Chloe immediately pulled over, her voice a calm, reassuring anchor in the storm that was raging inside me. "Stella, I'm right here. Breathe with me, you're safe." It took nearly 20 minutes for the panic to subside, leaving me utterly drained, humiliated, and shaking. That was the moment I knew I couldn't do this alone. The well-meaning but useless advice from my family was not just unhelpful, it was harmful. I needed professional help. The next day, my hands still trembling slightly, I searched online for therapists in my area who specialized in trauma and PTSD. I found Dr. Lena Hansen, a clinical psychologist whose profile exuded a sense of calm competence. Making that first appointment felt like a monumental act of self-preservation, a declaration that my pain was real and deserved to be treated, even if my family couldn't see it. My first session with Dr. Hansen was a revelation. I sat in her quiet, softly lit office, and for the first time since the accident, I told the whole story without interruption, without judgment, without someone telling me I was overreacting. I talked about the crash, the hospital, the physical pain, But most of all, I talked about the crushing loneliness, the profound sense of betrayal I felt from my family. When I finished, my voice hoarse, Dr. Hansen looked at me with genuine compassion. "Stella," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "what you went through was a significant trauma, and the response from your family is a secondary trauma. Their refusal to validate your experience is a wound in itself. You're not being dramatic. You're having a perfectly normal reaction to an abnormal and terrifying event, compounded by a lack of support from the people you needed most." Hearing those words was like a dam breaking inside me. The relief was so immense, so powerful, it brought a fresh wave of tears. For weeks, I had been made to feel like my suffering was a character flaw. Dr. Hansen gave me a new language for it. She called it PTSD. She explained the SC. Ints behind the flashbacks, the panic attacks, the hypervigilance. She validated every single thing I was feeling, and in doing so, she gave me back a piece of myself. Therapy became my lifeline. We worked on grounding techniques to manage the panic attacks. We began the slow, arduous process of EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing to help my brain process the traumatic memory of the crash. It was exhausting, painful work. There were sessions that left me feeling raw and emotionally hungover for days. But for the first time, I felt like I was moving forward, not just treading water. Of course, this essential treatment came at a cost. My insurance covered a portion of it, but the co-pays were substantial. At $150 per session, once a week, the bills started to add up quickly. I was already on short-term disability from work, my income significantly reduced. The financial strain was another layer of stress on top of everything else. Yet, I knew I couldn't stop. This was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It was the price of getting my life back. When I mentioned the cost to my mother during a phone call, hoping for a sliver of understanding, her response was predictably dismissive. "A therapist? Stella, isn't that a bit much? People have been going through hard times for centuries without paying someone to listen to their problems. It seems like a waste of money when you should be saving." I tried to explain, once again, that this was a medical necessity, that I had PTSD. Her response was a scoff. "That's one of those newfangled terms everyone uses when they're feeling a bit sad. You just need to be more resilient." The invisibility was staggering. It was as if I were speaking a language she refused to understand. I was handing her my pain, and she was handing it back unopened. Ethan was no better. When he found out about the therapy, he laughed. "A shrink? Seriously? Dude, just watch some motivational videos on YouTube. It's the same thing, and it's free." Each session with Dr. Hansen began with a transaction. I would hand over my credit card, and the receptionist would hand me a receipt, an invoice, a tangible record of a service rendered. I started keeping these invoices in a folder. At first, it was just for my own financial records, but as the weeks turned into months, the folder grew thicker and it began to represent something more. Each receipt was proof. It was proof of the pain my family refused to see. It was proof of the work I was doing to heal from the wounds they either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Every invoice was a testament to my struggle and a symbol of their neglect. The folder became a quiet monument to my invisibility, a collection of papers that screamed what I was no longer willing to whisper. This is real. This is what it costs. This is what you chose not to see. My weekly sessions with Dr. Hansen weren't just about processing the trauma of the car accident. As we delved deeper into my anxiety and my feelings of worthlessness, a clear and painful pattern began to emerge. The car crash wasn't an isolated incident of my family's neglect. It was simply the most dramatic and undeniable example in a long, deeply ingrained history of dismissal. My pain, my needs, and my accomplishments had always been treated as secondary to my brothers. Ethan was the golden child. It was a classic, textbook dynamic that I had never fully allowed myself to see until Dr. Hansen began asking questions. He was charming, outgoing, and effortlessly confident, while I was quieter, more studious, and more sensitive. Our parents, especially our mother, interpreted these differences in a way that always left me on the losing end. Ethan's confidence was seen as leadership potential. my quiet nature was seen as shyness or a lack of ambition. His occasional academic struggles were brushed off as him being a free spirit, while my straight A's were simply expected, met not with praise but with a nod and an "as it should be." I remembered my high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I had worked tirelessly for 4 years, sacrificing social events and weekends to maintain my grades. I stood at the podium and delivered a speech I had practiced for weeks. When I found my parents in the crowd afterward, my mother's first words were, "That was nice, dear. Did you see Ethan? He managed to get his diploma without even a single summer school class. We were so worried, but he pulled it off." My accomplishment, the highest academic honor in the school, was instantly eclipsed by her relief that my brother had met the bare minimum requirement for graduation. I felt myself shrink, my pride turning to a familiar, hollow ache. The favoritism extended to finances as well. When Ethan decided he wanted to become a real estate agent, my parents paid for his licensing courses, his first suit, and the deposit on his first professional car. They called it an investment in his future. When I aided from college with a degree in statistics and landed a competitive job as a data analyst, I asked for their help with a down payment on a small, sensible used car to get me to work. My mother had frowned. "Stella, you have a good job now. It's important for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It builds character." I ended up taking the bus for 6 months until I could save enough on my own. Dr. Hansen listened to these stories, each one a small cut from 1,000 different moments, and she helped me connect the dots. "Their behavior after the accident wasn't new," she explained one afternoon. "It was a conditioned response. They have a lifelong habit of minimizing your experiences, especially when compared to your brother S. In their eyes, Ethan's needs are emergencies, while yours are inconveniences." It was true. A few years ago, Ethan had racked up a significant amount of credit card debt on a series of impulsive purchases: designer clothes, expensive dinners, a trip to Vegas. When the collection agencies started calling, he went to our parents in a panic. They immediately drained a portion of their savings to bail him out, no questions asked. My mother had defended the decision to me later. "He just got a little carried away," she'd said. "He has a certain image to maintain for his job. We couldn't let a silly mistake ruin his career." A few months after that, the transmission in my 5-year-old car failed. The repair bill was over $2,000, a huge and unexpected expense for me. I cautiously approached my parents to ask for a small loan, promising to pay it back in monthly installments. My mother's response was a lecture on the importance of having an emergency fund. "This is exactly why I've always told you to be more careful with your money, Stella," she'd said, her voice filled with disappointment. They didn't lend me the money. I ended up putting the entire repair on a high-interest credit card, a debt that took me over a year to pay off. Ethan's irresponsibility was a silly mistake. My unforeseen mechanical failure was a character flaw. Unpacking this history in therapy was excruciating. It was like re-examining my entire life through a new, brutally honest lens. Every memory was tinged with the same painful realization: I had never been seen as an equal. My role in the family was to be the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble and didn't require much. I was the low-maintenance daughter, and I had played my part so well that when I finally had a real, desperate need, they were incapable of seeing it. They had looked at the wreckage of my life and treated it like a fender bender because, in their world, my problems had never been allowed to be big. The car accident hadn't created the wound. It had just ripped the old one wide open. It exposed the rot that had been festering at the core of our family dynamic for decades. My pain wasn't just about a car crash anymore. It was about a lifetime of being told, in 1,000 different ways, that I didn't matter as much. And as I sat in Dr. Hansen's office, week after week, slowly piecing together this heartbreaking puzzle, a new feeling began to take root alongside the grief and the anger. It was a quiet, firm resolve. The pattern had to stop, and I was the only one who could stop it. 6 months after the accident, the landscape of my life had changed dramatically. I was still in therapy, still working through the deep-seated trauma, but I was making progress. The panic attacks were less frequent, and I had even started driving short, familiar routes during daylight hours, a victory that felt as significant as climbing a mountain. I had returned to work, albeit on a part-time basis, as my cognitive stamina was still not what it used to be. The process was slow, frustrating, and nonlinear, but it was mine. I was rebuilding, piece by piece, on a foundation that now relied solely on myself and my small, fiercely loyal support system, which consisted of Chloe and Dr. Hansen. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, had withered into a state of benign neglect. Our conversations were infrequent and superficial, skating over the surface of our lives, never daring to dip into the cold, deep waters of what had happened. They never asked about my therapy, my recovery, or my lingering struggles. They seemed to have collectively decided that the unpleasantness of the accident was over, and they were more than happy to move on. Their denial was a wall I no longer had the energy to try and scale, so I simply stopped trying. I didn't call as often. I made excuses to miss Sunday dinners. I created a quiet, protective distance. During this time, I continued to collect the invoices from my therapy sessions. The folder was thick now, a hefty stack of receipts that represented thousands of dollars and countless hours of grueling emotional work. It sat in my desk drawer, a silent testament to my journey. I wasn't sure at first why I was keeping them so meticulously. It was more than just record keeping. It felt like I was building a case, gathering evidence for a trial that might never happen. Each receipt was an entry in a ledger, not of finances, but of neglect. Each line item was a moment of support I should have received, but had been forced to purchase for myself. The total was staggering. When I finally sat down and added it all up, the co-pays for therapy, the prescription costs for anti-anxiety medication, the income I'd lost from being on disability, it came to well over $10,000. That was the tangible, out-of-pocket cost of my recovery. But the number on the page represented something so much bigger. It was the price of their indifference. It was the cost of their emotional abandonment. One Tuesday afternoon, the call I had been subconsciously dreading and expecting for years finally came. It was Ethan. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was strained, laced with a panic I had only heard once before, when he was confessing his credit card debt to our parents. "Stell, I'm in some trouble," he began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Big trouble." He explained in a rush of words that a guaranteed real estate deal he had invested all his savings in had fallen through. Not only had he lost his own money, but he had also borrowed heavily from a private lender to finance it, and the payment was due. He was on the verge of financial ruin. His career, his reputation, everything was on the line. "I need to borrow some money," he said, the words tumbling out. "$15,000. I know it's a lot, but I'm desperate. I'll pay you back, I swear, every penny. I just need some help to get through this." I listened in silence, my hand resting on my desk, just inches from the drawer that held the folder. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was almost comical. For years, he had moved through life with the supreme confidence of a man who knew there was always a safety net, woven by our parents, ready to catch him. Now, for whatever reason, that net was gone. He mentioned they were tapped out from their cruise and some home renovations, and he was turning to me, to the responsible one. The one who was good with money. The one whose own, desperate need he had met with a text about insurance claims. "Why are you asking me?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Because you're my sister," he said, a note of incredulity in his voice, as if the answer should be obvious. "Your family, you're the only one I can turn to." Family, the word hung in the air between us, heavy and hollow. Family was supposed to be there for you in the wreckage. Family was supposed to hold your hand in the hospital. Family was supposed to listen when you were scared and in pain. By his own definition, by the definition he and our mother had modeled for my entire life, we were not family. We were just people who shared a bloodline. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. The path forward, which had been foggy for so long, was suddenly crystal clear. The trial I had been gathering evidence for was about to convene, and I was the judge, jury, and prosecutor. "Send me your email address," I said, my tone flat, unreadable. "I need to send you something. We can talk after you've had a chance to review it." Okay, great," he said, the relief evident in his voice. He clearly mistook my compliance for agreement. "You're a lifesaver, Stell. Seriously, I knew I could count on you." He rattled off his email address, and I wrote it down. After we hung up, I didn't move for a full minute. I just sat there, staring at the drawer. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I opened it and pulled out the thick folder, my ledger of neglect. It was time for an audit. It was time for the bill to come due. I spent the next hour preparing my response. It wasn't an act of spontaneous anger. It was a meticulous, calculated procedure, not unlike the data analysis I did for my job. I scanned every single receipt from Dr. Hansen's office. I created a spreadsheet, itemizing each one by date, service rendered, trauma therapy session, and cost. I added the pharmacy receipts for my medication. Then, I added another section, lost income. I calculated the difference between my regular salary and my short-term disability payments for the 3 months I was unable to work full-time. I formatted it all into a clean, professional-looking invoice, just like one my company would send to a client. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Invoice for services rendered and DAMAGES incurred." The bill to section was addressed to Ethan. The final line item under the subtotal was labeled, "Family Support, Copay, Patient Responsibility." The final amount was $10,347.5. At the bottom of the invoice, I added a note in sharp, clear italics. "Ethan, you asked me for a loan, appealing to the fact that we are family. Family support, however, is a two-way street. When my life was shattered, the support I needed was not there. Instead, I was met with dismissal and neglect, which constituted a secondary trauma that has required extensive professional treatment and has resulted in significant financial loss. Attached is the itemized bill for the cost of the support I was forced to outsource and purchase for myself due to the complete lack of it from you and our mother. This is the tangible cost of my recovery, a recovery I have had to navigate almost entirely on my own. Before we can discuss any financial assistance from my end, this outstanding debt must be settled. You said I was the only one you could turn to. For the last 6 months, this folder of receipts has been the only thing I could turn to. Consider this my response to your request." I took a deep breath, attached the PDF of the invoice and the scanned receipts to a new email, and typed his address into the to field. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The moment it was gone, I felt a strange sense of quiet. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the calm of a decision finally made, a truth finally spoken, even if it was just in the cold, impersonal format of a spreadsheet. The response was faster than I expected. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I let it ring twice, then answered and put it on speaker, placing it on the desk in front of me. "What the hell is this, Stella?" he yelled, his voice cracking with rage and disbelief. "Is this a joke, an invoice? Are you insane?" "No, Ethan," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that was raging in his. "It's not a joke. It's an accounting. You're good with numbers. You should be able to understand it." "You're billing me for your therapy? That's the most passive-aggressive, messed-up thing I have ever seen. The car accident was months ago. I can't believe you're still hung up on that." "Hung up on it?" I repeated the words, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "It's not something I'm hung up on. It's something I am living with every single day. The fact that you see my ongoing recovery as a grudge is the entire point. You have no concept of what I've been through because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to see." He was sputtering now, his anger dissolving into a desperate, confused mess. But I need your help. I'm your brother." "And I was your sister when I was lying in a hospital bed," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "I was your sister when I was having panic attacks so bad I couldn't leave my apartment. I was your sister when I was terrified and alone and all you could talk about was car insurance. You want the benefits of family, Ethan, but you refuse to accept the responsibilities. That's not how it works. Not anymore. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing heavily. Then, another voice came on the line. Our mother. He must have been at her house. Stella, this is your mother, Alina said, her voice dripping with disappointment and condescension. Ethan just showed me this disgusting document. I have never in my life been so ashamed. To throw your therapy in your brother's face like this when he is in trouble. It's cruel. After all we've done for you. All you've done for me? I asked, the question sharp and pointed. What have you done for me, Mom? You dismissed my pain, you belittled my trauma, and you told me to just think positive thoughts when my life was falling apart. That's not help. That's not support. That is abandonment. You are twisting things, she said, her voice turning icy. We have always supported you. You have always been too sensitive. No, I said, the word final, absolute. I am not too sensitive. You are not very supportive. There's a difference. I have a receipt for that difference. It's $10,347.50. I could hear her gasp, offended and outraged. But for the first time, her opinion, her shame, her disappointment, it didn't touch me. It was like a language I no longer understood. The power it once held over me was gone. The invoice stands, I said, my voice as calm and clear as a final judgment. There is nothing more to discuss. And with that, I hung up the phone. I blocked Ethan's number. I blocked my mother's number. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the only sound the soft hum of my computer. The debt on that invoice was unpayable, not because of the amount, but because it wasn't about money. It never was. It was about acknowledgement. It was about accountability. It was a bill for a debt of compassion that had been left unpaid for a lifetime, and I had finally, officially, sent it to collections. The days immediately following what I privately termed the reckoning were eerily quiet. I had expected an onslaught, angry voicemails from blocked numbers, emails, perhaps even an unannounced visit. But there was nothing. It was a profound silence, a void where the static of my family's drama used to be. At first, it was unsettling. I found myself checking my phone, bracing for an attack that never came. But as the hours turned into days, the silence began to feel less like the calm before a storm and more like a long overdue peace. Chloe, when I told her what I had done, had a reaction that was a mixture of shock and awe. You sent them a bill, she'd said, her eyes wide, before breaking into a slow grin. Stella, that is the most brilliantly savage and appropriate thing I have ever heard. I'm so proud of you. Her validation was a warm, steadying presence, a reminder that the family you choose can often be more real than the one you are born into. About a week later, I received a single, formal-looking email from my father. He was always the silent partner in my mother's campaign of dismissal, a passive observer who enabled her by his inaction. His message was short and to the point. Stella, your mother and I are deeply hurt by your actions. We are lending Ethan the money he needs. I hope one day you will realize the damage you have done to this family. We will not be contacting you again until you are ready to apologize. I read the email twice. They had bylaid Ethan out again. Of course they had. The golden child would always be protected. And I was, once again, being cast as the villain, the source of the problem. But this time, something inside me had fundamentally shifted. The words deeply hurt didn't trigger guilt. The demand for an apology didn't trigger shame. All I felt was a quiet, sad sense of finality. They were never going to see it. They were never going to understand. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I didn't need them to. I typed a simple, two-word reply, invoice paid. I hit send, and then, without ceremony, I deleted their email addresses and moved my father's message to the trash. It was over. The months that followed were a period of quiet, intentional reconstruction. Without the constant, low-level stress of my family's judgment and dismissal, I had so much more energy to focus on my own healing. I continued my therapy with Dr. Hansen, but our sessions began to change. We spent less time processing the trauma of the accident and their neglect, and more time building my future. We talked about boundaries, self-worth, and what it meant to build a life on my own terms, defined by my own values. I slowly returned to work full-time. My focus came back, sharper than before. I found a new sense of confidence in my abilities, a pride in my independence that wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. I started exploring hobbies I'd long neglected. I joined a hiking club and spent my weekends exploring trails, finding a sense of peace and strength in the quiet solitude of nature. I reconnected with old friends, nurturing the relationships that were reciprocal and life-giving. My life became smaller but infinitely richer. The peace I had cultivated was not a passive absence of conflict, but an active, vibrant state of being. It was a serenity I had fought for, a quiet I had earned. And yes, it had come at a price. The price was the family I had been born with. It was a painful, grieving loss, and there were moments when the ghost of what I wished we could have been would surface. But the reality was, that family had never truly existed. I was mourning an idea, not a reality. The real cost, I realized, was the one detailed on my invoice: $10,347.50. That was the price of my well-being. It was the cost of hiring a professional to provide the validation, compassion, and guidance my family could not. And it was the best money I had ever spent. It was an investment not in a failing real estate deal, but in myself. I never heard from Ethan or my mother again. Through the grapevine of extended family, I heard that Ethan had managed to salvage his career, thanks to our parents' bailout. I felt nothing. His life, his choices, his dramas, they were no longer my concern. They were stories from a distant country to which I had no plans to return. One evening, about a year after the accident, I was driving home. It was raining, just as it had been that fateful night. For a moment, a flicker of the old panic surfaced as headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. But I took a deep breath, using the grounding techniques Dr. Hansen had taught me. I focused on the feeling of the steering wheel in my hands, the sound of my own calm breathing, the steady rhythm of the wipers. The panic subsided, replaced by a quiet, powerful sense of calm. I was safe. I was in control. The past was a scar, not an open wound. And I had finally, painstakingly, paid the price for my own serenity. The bill was settled. I was at peace.